All right. Here we go. Hello, everybody. We are back for another episode of Goddess Bible Study. It's just me and Lisa in the house tonight. So thank you, Lisa. We'll see if any of our other friends join us late. But yeah, this is a fun one for me personally, since this is what got it all started for me personally on the whole Goddess Bible Study. So we got our latest Chat GPT image here. I presented this material before, so I kind of whipped it up quick. There's actually a lot more to said than what I have in here, but yeah, it's a fun image. I asked for Solomon's temple with smoke billowing out of it and some pot plants.
You know, did a good job. The
Give me what
plants
I
are
asked for.
beautiful as always. That looks like a lot of smoke. Somebody's really smoking up.
They got it going on, man. All right, so this is a topic that got it all started for me. In 2018, I began researching cannabis in the Bible with the plan of writing a book. I was aware that cannabis is mentioned by name in 5 verses of the Old Testament in the original Hebrew, but was mistranslated as a different plant, so we don't see it in modern Bibles. This mistranslation occurred in the Septuagint, the first Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible back in 300 BC, and it's been transmitted ever since. So the meaning of the word has long been lost, and this scholarship has only been recently rediscovered. So we now know what people did not know before was that cannabis was once sacred to the Hebrews. It is listed as an ingredient in Moses' holy anointing oil, a recipe that comes directly from the mouth of God, so it must have been important. But cannabis is clearly not sacred in modern Jewish and Christian traditions today, so they must have gotten rid of the plant at some point in history. My plan for the book was to figure out when and why that had happened. I opened a Bible for the first time since high school and began digging into modern academic scholarship to try and make sense of the story. It was here that I first discovered Asherah, the one-time wife of God. God had a wife? I thought this was the most outrageous thing I'd ever heard, and it made no sense. And now we have Goddess Bible Study, but that is another story. I quickly came to the hypothesis that cannabis and the goddess must have been thrown out together, and that is in fact exactly what happened. Cannabis was deeply sacred in the goddess traditions of the original pagan Israelites when they still had a mother goddess. But they divorced her when they transitioned from paganism into monotheism, from pagans into monotheists, and all of her nature-based traditions and sacred plants were deemed profane. My book was originally titled Cannabis and the Goddess before a last-minute change at publication time to A History of the Goddess from the Ice Age of the Bible, which I think is a better title. Anyway, let's get into the evidence and the stories. Any comments? All right. So there's 5 verses. 5 verses in the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, use the Hebrew word canna or bosm as the name of cannabis, but is mistranslated as either calamus, which is a different plant, or aromatic cane. In all 5 instances, cannabis fits the context, while calamus and aromatic cane do not. And aromatic cane is itself a meaningless term. So the verses are Exodus 30:23, Song of Solomon 4:14, Isaiah 43:24, Jeremiah 6:20, and Ezekiel 27:17. Cannabis is described as a sacred ingredient in Moses' holy anointing oil, a valued aromatic herb, a burnt offering in the temple twice, and as an object of trade from Lebanon. All of these references are during the First Temple period or earlier. Cannabis was eventually thrown out in the Reformation of the Yahweh Alone movement, and it does not appear again in the Second Temple. And so the word is actually used a lot more times than just these 5 because it also means branch. So it shows up like 60 times as the word branch, like specifically in the menorah, but I didn't get into that in this article. Biblical commentary has long noticed that the spice mentioned in these 5 verses, specifically canna or cannabism, is vague and ambiguous, and there is no historical consensus among Jewish and Christian scholars on the proper translation. Bosom means sweet or pungent, often in the context of aromatics applied to the body, while canna means branch or reed. So, or that's why, or canes. That's why they get the aromatic cane. So, among the various candidates suggested for canna, include calamus, sweet cane, ginger grass, camel grass, lemongrass, sugar cane, balm oil, fennel, and other plants as well. Aromatic cane is actually a good description of cannabis since it grows 10 feet tall and is rather pungent. This is, in fact, an important scholarly question. It's not just trivia for potheads. If it can be proven that cannabis cannabis and was burned in the first Hebrew temple, then there are profound theological, historical, cultural, and legal implications that reverberate in today's society, beginning with the entire concept of marijuana prohibition. So why not calamus? Calamus, or Acorus calamus L, better known as sweet flag, is an herbaceous perennial, a common marsh plant. The flowers are sweetly fragrant and psychoactive. It is a well-known plant used in Indian traditional medicine for centuries. Its aroma makes calamus an essential oil valued in the perfume industry and used as a flavor for foods, alcoholic beverages, and bitters, like that you put in cocktails. So far, so good for calamus. The problem is that calamus is extremely toxic in high doses, such as required in the holy anointing oil, nor is it typically a burnt offering. Calamus was even banned for use as human food or as a food additive in 1968 by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration because it contains more than 75% acerone. Acerone is a poison that has been shown to cause cancer and has ill effects on heart, liver, and kidney functions. This toxin in calamus is used for pest control. So the etymology of cannabism as cannabis was first identified by the Polish scholar Sula Bennett, also aka Sarah Benetoa, I think is her married name, in her 1936 PhD thesis from Columbia University, and then again in a 1975 paper. Her work has been confirmed by modern scholars, though her conclusions are controversial in conservative circles. Modern cannabis scholar Chris Bennett, who's a friend of mine, discovered Sula Bennett's work in the 1990s and popularized the findings with today's audiences, including me. So cannabism has clear similarities to other ancient names for cannabis, such as the Assyrian kunubu. Kunubu is listed as an ingredient in the sacred rites in a letter by the mother of the Assyrian king, Esarhaddon, in 680 BCE, which is contemporary to the First Temple. I think King Esarhaddon is even named in the Bible. He's one of the Assyrian kings that invades the biblical lands. So cannabis was widely used for both fibers and drugs across Bronze Age Anatolia, Canaan, Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Persia, and is thoroughly documented as deeply sacred in India since prehistoric times. So the point being, we know it was there at the time, definitely in use. So here are the 5 verses. The Moses Holy Anointing Oil is the most important reference since it highlights the sacred value of the plant. This recipe was given directly by God to Moses, and it was used to anoint all the sacred objects in the temple, as well as to anoint high priests and kings. Producing this recipe with calamus would likely make you sick, but with cannabis, it is highly psychoactive. Like I know people that people will make this recipe today, like out in California and Humboldt County and stuff. People totally cook this recipe up, and yeah, if you pour it over your head, you'll get plenty stoned.
Have you tried it yourself?
I mean, I've sampled it, but never like poured it like over my head, like or dripping off my beard like that. But I knew people, I've met people who had like jars of it, and they showed it to me and tasted it.
So they're absorbing it through the pores in the skin,
Yep.
essentially. Yeah, so that it goes directly into the lymphatic system then.
Yeah, you could drink it too, but yeah, it's an olive oil. But yeah, you smear it on your skin, and you know they describe it in the Bible when they anoint the kings and the priests that it comes like they pour it over his head and it comes dripping off his beard, and they really get you all soaking wet with it.
Yes.
And so yeah, and it absorbs all through the skin, and it definitely works. Um, so the recipe for the holy anointing oil is potent. 250 shekels of cannabis equals 6.28 pounds. So 6.25 pounds of flowering cannabis tops infused into roughly 1.5 gallons of olive oil, around 6 liters, plus myrrh, cinnamon, and cassia. This recipe was boiled and distilled so that all the spices were infused into the oil. So we wrote about this on another topic, so there's a link if you want to read more. So this is the quote. Take the following fine spices, 500 shekels of liquid myrrh, half as much, that is 250 shekels of fragrant cinnamon, 250 shekels of fragrant cannabis, translated as usually as either calamus or aromatic cane in the English Bibles, 500 shekels of cassia, all according to the sanctuary shekel, and a hin of olive oil. Make these into a sacred anointing oil, a fragrant blend, the work of a perfumer. It will be the sacred anointing oil. And so when they say the work of a perfumer, that's actually specific techniques that they would have used in the ancient world.
Yeah, for like extraction and blending and everything. And I'm just trying to imagine, I bet that smelled pretty good.
Yeah, right. No, it's all good smelling stuff.
Yeah.
Cannabis, the cinnamon, um, and I don't know what cassia. I think cassia is aromatic too. I don't know what it is, but the
It's
myrrh,
very similar to cinnamon, and myrrh smells amazing.
right? Yeah,
Yeah.
no, the myrrh we're gonna mention
Myrrh,
again right here.
you should know that myrrh is also associated with the mother.
Oh, absolutely. So,
Yeah.
song. And the second reference is a Song of Songs. Frankincense, myrrh, and cannabis were routinely blended to make intoxicating incense in the ancient world. Here they are listed among other aromatic herbs in the romantic Song of Songs from King Solomon, our favorite goddess worshiper. Um,
Mhm.
your plants are an orchard of pomegranates with choice fruits, with henna and spikenard and saffron, cannabis and cinnamon, with all the trees of frankincense, myrrh, and aloes, and all the finest spices. Like that's a pretty good smelling bunch of bouquet of plants there. Uh,
Saffron is highly coveted. It's very difficult to get, and it's worth a ton of money. Like saffron, just little threads of saffron, so expensive.
right, yeah, it's the most expensive um, like herb or like culinary herb, um, even as much as gold
Yeah.
sometimes.
And
Maybe not
then
at today's gold prices, but
you should know too that frankincense is associated with the father. So frankincense is the father and myrrh is the mother.
we're gonna mention that too again
Okay.
down the way. So, all right. So I
Sorry.
know what pomegranates are. Henna,
Mhm.
henna they use for inking the temporary tattoos on women in Indian women's art, and for
Hair
dye, right?
and for dyeing,
Does it smell
dyeing
good?
all kinds of things.
And
Um,
I don't know
it's
what
got an earthy smell, and I haven't smelled spikenard, but
I don't know what
I've been
yeah, I don't know what spikenard is.
thinking of getting some.
Oh, you've heard of it? Spikenard? I've never even heard of
Yeah,
it.
I mean, it was part of what Mary Magdalene used to anoint Yeshua when he died and was reborn.
Oh, wow. Spikenard. All right.
Yeah.
Thanks. Awesome. So again, good smelling stuff. All drug plants, all mixed together. All right. So in the book of Isaiah, we get a reference to being burned as a temple, being demanded by Yahweh. So this is Yahweh speaking. I have not burdened you with offerings or wearied you with frankincense. You have not brought any cannabis or with silver for me or lavished on me the fat of your sacrifices, but you have burdened me with your sins and wearied me with your iniquities. So Yahweh was unhappy, not been getting enough weed, not getting enough ganja brought to him and silver.
Worse.
So in Ezekiel, actually, let's go down this one first. We'll come back. So this is the second time it's demanded as an offering. This is the prophet Jeremiah. So who was one of the leading prophets of the reform movement, and he's during Josiah's reign, and he witnessed the destruction of Jerusalem and goes into exile. Um, so Yahweh is angry about something here and not satisfied with the offerings being made. And perhaps this is part of the reforms, since Jeremiah was one of these prophets. So, what do I care about frankincense from Sheba or cannabis from a distant land? Your burnt offerings are not acceptable. Your sacrifices do not please me. So, Yahweh was in a bad mood. Your burnt offerings are not acceptable. Your sacrifices do not please me. But frankincense and cannabis, um, as a burnt offerings mixed, combined again. We'll see it again. And it says it's from a distant land. So I don't know if Lebanon counts as a distant land from Judah in those days, but here is a reference to Lebanon because this is the last of the 5 references. This is Ezekiel. So, and it's a list of trade goods from the city of Tyre, which was the great city of that day, on the Phoenician coast, the Lebanese coast. So, cannabis fibers and drug products were widely traded in the ancient world. So, both the fiber and the drugs, hemp fibers. And so, here the prophet Ezekiel listed cannabis among trade goods from the Phoenician city of Tyre. The Bekaa Valley in Lebanon today remains and has been famous for centuries for growing cannabis since ancient times. So they've been growing drug cannabis in the Bekaa Valley since at least since the Roman era, but really presumably before that. And nowadays, Hezbollah, there's so Hezbollah for the last our modern lifetime since the 80s has controlled the marijuana hashish trade out of the Bekaa Valley in Lebanon and has funded their some of their military efforts.
Read about
And
that at one point, and yeah, I was gonna ask, this is where most of the hash is made, right?
or some of it is. It's definitely it's not the only location. Hashish comes from Afghanistan originally. They definitely make it in Morocco. There's a bunch of places where they make it up in the mountains where it's cool. Hashish has got to be made up in the mountains where it's cool, so it doesn't melt, like literally. Um, but yeah, Bekaa Valley for sure. It's one of those places. Lebanese hash is really famous,
Aren't they also producing opium?
and opium too. Yep.
Yeah,
And
so kind
they were documented in the Roman era. We have like documentation of drugs coming from Bekaa Valley, feeding the Roman Empire. It was the Bekaa Valley is a breadbasket for all sorts of agriculture, so including drug products, but food too, and fiber hemp. They grew it all in Bekaa Valley. It was like the one of the big bread baskets of the ancient world, and it's still an important agricultural area today. Um,
kind of remarkable and amazing that all these many, many thousands of years later, all these years later, like a lot of these people are still doing the thing, right? They're still doing
Totally.
the
No,
things that
I had
were
a
going
friend
on
I had a
in
friend
ancient
that's
times.
Lebanese. She was telling me that, like, her family's there, like, indigenously, like, they're like, "Oh, no, we're Phoenicians, like, we have been here all along through all of, like." Lebanon's really the most fascinating place because it's been destroyed so many times and rebuilt so many times, and now we're seeing it again. The civil war in the 80s. My parents were in the government, my dad was, and a friend of theirs was in that Beirut embassy bombing in 1983, was killed, a friend of my parents. Um, so yeah, it's a wild place, and but like so rich in culture and so rich in people and like the most like resilient, talented people that like have these like deep roots and are just like I was watching this documentary of folks in Lebanon right now, like under the current circumstances that are very difficult in Beirut, trying to start businesses and trying to um, just like continue to rebuild, like just continue to be optimistic despite all of like the chaos in their entire country. And it's like been like that for over and over and over again. The whole idea of the phoenix bird comes from the Phoenicians, and it comes from their whole reputation that since they were the richest people in certain parts of history, they were routinely get like sacked and attacked by like whatever rampaging empire of that century comes through. And they would take all their stuff and all their riches out in boats and like sail away for a while and wait for the Assyrians, whoever else, Alexander the Great, whoever else to be done sacking the place. And then they come back and rebuild it again. And they've done it over and over and over again.
I mean, clearly they have favor with whatever gods or what have you, but it's that's remarkable too to be so resilient. And I think that the beauty and the fertility of that land is obviously such a blessing. And it sounds like those people are still very tied to the land. And I think when you're really still tied to the land where you came from, like that's part of what makes you resilient. And that's part of how, if you have that good relationship with that land, how you become wealthy.
Yeah, I mean, they were also just like extremely talented and like they were the original like traders and the original maritime sailors that were the first people to navigate by the stars and really start to sail away from the sight of land because people had boats since forever, but they typically stayed close to the shore. Once people started routinely sailing by navigation and leaving the site of land, that was like a big step forward. It was the Phoenicians, as far as we know, that did it. And they're the first people to really master that, which in turn is how we know we live on a round earth, because it was those people that live on, when you're on a sailboat out of sight of land, you have a horizon completely around you. It's completely dead obvious that we live on a round earth because of the lighthouse effect and how the way stuff appears coming over the horizon. It's dead obvious. You can explain it to a child that like we live on a round ball. It's like totally obvious once you got on a boat. So you don't need any NASA or any space travel or anything fancy astronomy to like understand that the world is round. You just have to go out in a boat and like away from land, and then it's totally obvious. Um, it's kind of a silly that anyone should even think to debate that.
Referencing though too, like the ocean, and then we're talking about the land and the fertility, like it's where the goddess shows up in a very animistic way,
Well, she is
and
the
all the
waters.
references, right? The waters, like the womb from which all was created, like that's where the goddess is showing up too in other ways, right? In these stories and through with these people and blessing them clearly.
Oh yeah, no. And all the sailing traditions are always goddess centric. Hey there, Nathan.
Hi,
Um,
Nathan.
all of the sailors, all the maritime stuff from the ancient world, like Aphrodite, it comes from the oceans, and all the great goddesses. So many of them come with the oceans and are associated with the oceans. Asherah is associated with the oceans. A bunch of them are, but for the Greeks, it was specifically Aphrodite. Um, and then for the Phoenicians, it was too, but I'm not sure which goddess it was. But Isis for the Egyptian sailors, and there's all these prayers to like, um, to the great goddess for safety on their sailing journeys. So I don't know if we read this. Damascus did business with you because of your many products and great wealth of goods. They offered wine from Helbon, wool from Zahar, and casks of wine from Izal in exchange for your wares, wrought iron, cassia, cannabis, and cannabis. So, all right. So that was trade goods from Lebanon. All right, we read this. All right. So now this is really interesting. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this. Shoot, wrong buttons here. So archaeological evidence of cannabis. So the scholarly argument for cannabis in the Bible had been based on etymology and conjecture until just recently, when an archaeological study brought full confirmation. Tel Arad is an extremely important archaeological site in Israel, as it contains the only example of a temple outside Jerusalem during the period when the first temple stood. And it's got the same 3 rooms set up with the Holy of Holies as the Jerusalem temple and as many temples from that era. And so this is like in like the Israel Museum in Jerusalem. Like this is like their big, like going like the, Air and Space Museum and seeing the space shuttle. Like this is like one of their big, there's only so many like big important archaeological sites from First Temple Israel. And this is one of the big ones. You can go visit the whole town. The whole town was abandoned because it's a town out in the desert, like on the edge of the Israeli their borders. And it got buried, or at least the temple did. So so the site it's very famous, but it's controversial because the temple that I was talking about is pagan, and it clearly contains a pair of standing stones for Yahweh and Asherah and the Holy of Holies. And there's also a pair of incense altars accompanying the standing stones. And so I'll show you that, why it's controversial. So the altars, so this stuff has been found decades ago. It's been in the Israeli museum since like the 60s, 1960s. And so they'd always noticed that there was some plant residue on where the incense was being burned, like on the altar itself. But it was only in 2020 that the residue was sampled and completely analyzed, and the findings published in a peer-reviewed journal. And the pair of incense altars were found to have residues of frankincense and cannabis, and providing firm scientific evidence confirming the etymological argument for cannabis in the Bible that Chris Bennett has been making since the 90s. So the smaller altar had cannabis and was paired with the standing stone for Asherah, while the larger frankincense altar went with Yahweh. Just as Lisa was saying earlier in the conversation, that the frankincense goes with the father and the cannabis goes with the mother. That's exactly what we see in this. All right, so this is proper peer-reviewed science journal, the Institute of Archaeology at Tel Aviv University. So this is what's in the Israeli museum. It's a recreation of, you can go visit the site as a tourist, but this is the recreation they have inside the museum. And when they recreated it in the museum, they didn't put the second standing stone back up. You can see the shadow of the standing stone right here on the right, but there is a stone. They have the stone, but they didn't put it up. And if you go to the tourist one, you'll see them both. So they have both incense altars, but they don't put up both standing stones because in the museum, they can only go so far with admitting the pagan stuff.
Cheeky.
But they're not going to put it right in your face for the tourists in the middle of Jerusalem. But yeah, so all right, so then you can see these pictures up here. There's shows the smudges of plant residue that was analyzed, and the smaller one here has the cannabis on it. The one on the right, the one on the left, the bigger one has the frankincense, and that was only in 2020. That's like new information, so super cool. And that's the article. Cannabis and frankincense at the Judahite Shrine of Arad. So you can look that up if you want to.
It's really cool, though. Also, just to see something so ancient.
Yeah, we can look at this picture some more. Picture's worth 1,000 words, right? I mean, straight up pagan idolatry, like a making a rock into a god. You see that in India today. In India, they do it all over the place. Hare Krishna is totally like paint faces on rocks and like turn that into an altar, or pile up some rocks and call it a god. And that's exactly what the reformers, in the Old Testament, what they mean, it's right there in the Ten Commandments, thou shalt not do idolatry. And that's exactly the idolatry that they were doing. Which the Bible tells us they were doing, because this is their idolatrous time period.
One of my favorite sites as well.
So you're familiar with this, right, Nathan?
Yeah, it's awesome, especially with the burnt cannabis and stuff. I was big into that. I was happy that they found it, so it was real cool because, a lot of people, they were saying, speculation. A lot of people still don't know about this science. Like, no, we have proof of this stuff. It's like literal evidence. We know that the Hebrews were using this and they were pagan.
Chris Bennett and I went on like a whole thing to like try and get some academics to engage with us, like on the evidence. Chris has like been doing this scholarship for years. He's not an academic, so I don't take him seriously, but actually his scholarship's quite good. He's got, tons of scholarly details and footnotes, like way more than I ever do. Like I'm like lazy compared to him. His writing's all like encyclopedic. But together we were trying to like engage with some of these academics to like just get us to like, we presented all this same material I've got in this deck here. We just could not get any bites, man. It was ridiculous. Like the academics just won't engage fully.
Isn't there also theories regarding this? I'm pretty sure there's a theory regarding this could be the first temple with some. It's not as popular, but I'm pretty sure there's an actual theory for that too.
Well, it's just that from the time period when they had loads of temples, and then the reformers will come in and smash all the temples outside of Jerusalem and say you're only allowed to worship in Jerusalem. I mean, that's what the reformers do. One God, one king, one priesthood, one temple, centralized control over everybody's everything, and no more community-based altars out in the countryside. That used to be how people just did it on their own forever. So we need new community-based altars, new churches.
Diversity, more opportunities. I mean, like they didn't just take away like the mother, the goddess. They like eliminated the ability, or not necessarily ability, but they outlawed like the worship of all these different gods that were available.
Yeah, like they reduce the possibilities and reduce the imagination and limit your thinking. And it's really funny that we should be like culturally so badmouth polytheism, because I've really come around to just polytheism. They're like, oh, it's just so much better. Like it makes things so much more understandable. Monotheism just doesn't actually make any sense. And then they just beat into your head with a stick and tell you you're a heretic if you don't like follow the rules. So anyway, So the Telrod temple site, this is very interesting history here. This is really important. So the reason why they were able to find it was because it had been carefully buried in the 8th century BCE, which allowed for its full preservation. The twin standing stones and incense altars for Yahweh and Asherah that stood in the Holy of Holies were laid down and carefully buried by hand. They weren't smashed, and they weren't just abandoned. They were buried under sand by hand, and that's why they were so well preserved and why they make for such a remarkable find. The question is, why was a temple site buried? Why did they do that after all? Other temple sites got buried too. Göbekli Tepe was buried by hand, all very carefully. That's why they discovered that in such good shape. So we don't know entirely why people do that. So the site was either buried because of the monotheistic reforms of King Hezekiah, as described in the Bible, or alternatively, because of the Assyrian invasion in that time period, also during King Hezekiah, that saw Israel destroyed and Jerusalem attacked, but surviving. So scholars will argue both sides. Some people want to say the Bible story is being presented as true, and some people want to just be critical theory and say it's not true. I think it's clear evidence of the reforms that are being described in the story.
Here's an idea or a thought. What if the people who were worshiping in this temple saw that what was coming? They knew they were going to be under attack or what have you in the reforms or like reforms, whatever, and they wanted to literally preserve it themselves so that it couldn't and would not be destroyed.
This is the tricky thing about discerning the historical, what actually happened, the historicity of it, because the Assyrians really did invade and sack, completely destroy Israel, and they sacked all of Judah. We've got the Assyrian records that coincide, and we will get to this material. The Assyrian records repeat the Bible story on this subject. So the Bible says the Assyrians came through and laid waste to everything, and the Assyrians were like, yeah, we came through and laid waste to everything. So people may well have buried the stuff intentionally to preserve it in advance of the invasion. That's a perfectly logical argument. And, I don't know. I wasn't there. And since it's under the same king, we don't know. A couple years earlier, they may have been buried because of the reforms, or maybe it's just all wrapped up together and some complicated historical stew that's difficult to discern. But either way, the Bible claims that King Hezekiah both did these reforms where they buried the temple sites and was attacked by the Assyrians. That both things happened according to the story. So the Bible tells us about the reformer kings of Hezekiah and Josiah. They're about a century apart in the 8th and 7th centuries BCE. These kings championed the Yahweh alone movement and worked to centralize worship in the Jerusalem temple. These reforms centered on shutting down the popular pagan goddess traditions that were not subject to their authority. Oh, I got a typo there. And, shutting down the community altars, the high places they call them, and forcing everybody to come into the one centralized temple. And these were not popular reforms. As soon as King Hezekiah died, the people went right back to their paganism, like the day he died. And then, like his grandson or great grandson is Josiah, and he does reforms. And the day he dies, they go back to their paganism. So they were never popular reforms. These are top down and imposed on the people because the people love the mother goddess. They love all that stuff. So they don't want to shut it down. So King Hezekiah was the real king of Judah from 715 to 686 BCE. He is definitely a historical figure, thoroughly attested by archaeologists, and the religious reforms were said to be early in his reign. So this is from 2 Kings. King Hezekiah, he removed the high places, smashed the sacred stones, and cut down the Asherah poles. He broke into pieces the bronze snake that Moses had made. For up to that time, the Israelites had been burning incense to it. It was called Nehushtan, a mere piece of brass. So again, this is getting to where they're inverting all the goddess symbols, getting rid of the serpents, saying the serpents are bad, quit burning incense to it. Get rid of the Asherah poles, the carved wooden poles that are like sacred groves and sacred trees. And so these are the reforms. Smash the idols.
Even serpents were very influenced in the Canaanite culture as well. And then that serpent pole be later brought back with the Christians as well, which is kind of ironic.
What, the Asherah pole?
Kind of, I guess you could say, but the serpent one I was saying, but I'd say it's probably tied in with it. Like, I wouldn't doubt.
The serpent or the pole?
The serpent pole I was talking about.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, that sticks around as the Greek caduceus, which is a symbol for medicine. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, as well.
Yeah, that comes to us from the Greeks, who got it from here. I mean, everybody was doing it.
Yeah.
So King Josiah was Hezekiah's grandson or great-grandson. He ruled Judah from 640 to 609 BCE, with the reforms coming around 630 BCE. He's not as well attested archaeologically. He did away with idolatrous priests appointed by the kings of Judah to burn incense on the high places of the towns of Judah and on those around Jerusalem. Those who burned incense to Baal, to the sun and moon, to the constellations, and to all the starry hosts. He took the Asherah pole from the temple of Yahweh to the Kidron Valley outside Jerusalem and burned it there. He ground it into powder and scattered the dust over the graves of the common people. So here's clearly saying the Asherah pole was in the temple of Yahweh. And we've talked about elsewhere that the Asherah pole was in the temple of Yahweh for about 2/3 of the 400 years that the temple stood. It's about 360 years, and 240 of those 360 years, the Asherah pole was in there, and there was a couple other reformer kings too, but they didn't go quite as far as Hezekiah and Josiah.
It's interesting about the turning it into powder and scattering the dust over the graves of the common people. That's pretty interesting.
Right. Yeah, right.
It's almost thoughtful, really, right?
No, it's definitely like a ritualistic, right? Like they would have done a ritual to desacralize and profane. Sometimes in some of the places they talk about how they turned the temple into a latrine, the one that they want. The temple. There's another story of the temple of Baal where they burned it down and turned it into a latrine, and it's been a latrine to this day. So he also tore down the quarters of the male Kadesh, the holy ones, the temple sodomites that were in the temple of Yahweh, and the quarters where women did weaving for Asherah. So we'll talk about this next time. The male eunuch, transgender, the male Kadesh. So we talk about the Kadesh a lot, the priestesses, but the males who are trans are called the Kadesh. And they're only mentioned a couple times, and this is one of them, but it's only when they're being chased away that they get mentioned. They're only ever mentioned when they're being chased away. But they get translated as temple sodomites. When they don't get called the holy ones in the English text, the priestesses are called prostitutes, and the males are called temple sodomites. Or dogs. They also call them dogs. So not very charitable in the Bible towards the trans folks. So Josiah smashed the sacred stones and cut down the Asherah poles and covered the sites with human bones. Even the altar at Bethel, even that altar and high place he demolished. He burned the high place and ground it to powder and burned the Asherah pole also. So this line about even the altar at Bethel, even that altar, because the temple at Bethel is where what's the original name of Israel? What was his name before he got the name Israel? Jacob?
Yes, I think so. I think it's Jacob, yes.
So when he gets the name Israel, when he after the evening of wrestling with the angel or wrestling with God, and he gets the name Israel, it's Bethel, which was called House of El, that he goes and builds an altar on at Bethel, and it's an altar to El, and it says El is the God of Israel. El Eloi Israel. El is the God of Israel. So even that altar in high place he demolished, and that's a particularly important altar because that's like their original altar. So this Josiah fellow, he was really not, holding back. Grounded to powder, burned the Asherah pole also. These altars are all made of limestone, so they can't actually be broken down pretty easily. So that would be around 630 BC. So what's not much later, King Josiah gets himself killed. And then the Babylonians defeat the Assyrians, and the Babylonians sack Jerusalem for good. So, which is 586 BC. So Jerusalem gets sacked, and the first temple destroyed by the invading Babylonians, and the Israelites are sent into exile. As the exiles were leaving their home, with Jerusalem in flames behind them, the prophet Jeremiah, who we heard from before, attempted to castigate the women for their ongoing goddess worship and scapegoat them for the tragic turn of events. The women were not having it. This is the women talking, yelling back at Jeremiah after he was scolding them. We will not listen to the message you have spoken to us in the name of Yahweh. We will certainly do everything we said we would. We will burn incense to the Queen of Heaven and will pour out drink offerings to her, just as we and our ancestors, our kings and our officials did in the towns of Judah and in the streets of Jerusalem. At that time, we had plenty of food and were well off and suffered no harm. But ever since we stopped burning incense to the Queen of Heaven and pouring out drink offerings to her, we have had nothing and have been perishing by sword and famine. And so this is part of a longer argument between the women and Jeremiah, which ultimately ends with the women basically telling Jeremiah to piss off, and he's like, fine, and he leaves. But yeah, it shows that they were pagan all the way through the first temple, without leaving the biblical text at all.
They thrive just as Solomon, like that the people who are still practicing paganism and honoring the goddess, they're the ones that
I know,
thrive.
they're the ones doing well, right? They're the ones thriving.
Right.
It's only when they
Yes.
stop worshiping the goddess that they suffer by perishing by sword and famine. I mean, the Bible itself. I mean, what more authority do we need than to worship the goddess? I mean, it's telling us right here.
Well done to them for standing their ground as well, especially against violent men.
I know, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we are going to wrap up here, or almost wrap up, with the Garden of Eden story. So now we're going to talk about a couple places where there's 3 places where my personal interpretation sees cannabis in the story, though it's not by name. So the first one is the Garden of Eden, which we've discussed before. And I'm not the first one to talk about this, but I see it. I think I put my own spin on the interpretation. So the Garden of Eden story, I argue, is a mythological condemnation of the traditional goddess religion of Asherah, Astarte, and Anat. The Garden of Eden story was likely written during these reforms of King Hezekiah and Josiah, when the Yahwists were working hard to centralize control in the Jerusalem temple and shut down the popular goddess traditions. Like Hesiod's Pandora from the Greeks, which is a contemporary story, Pandora, like Eve, like Pandora, was cast as the source of all men's trouble, and that she must be restrained. Eve being Adam's second wife, after he got rid of his first wife, Lilith, who wasn't submissive and was sexually dominant. He had to get rid of her and get an Eve who come in and be good and submissive. So many celebrated symbols and images of the goddesses, such as the serpent, garden, sacred plants, and childbirth, were inverted and profaned in the Garden of Eden story in an effort to subvert Eve and all women to patriarchal authority. Cannabis makes an important appearance in my interpretation, and it is also condemned. The great goddess traditions were matriarchal women's religions, and the patriarchal Yahweh shut them down so the Heavenly Father could rule alone with no wife or competition. So this is from the Garden of Eden. And Yahweh God commanded the man, you are free to eat from any tree in the garden, but you must not eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, for when you eat from it, you will certainly die. Genesis 2. So that's God talking, but God's not exactly telling the truth. You will certainly not die, the serpent said to the woman, for God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. Adam named his wife Eve because she would become the mother of all living, which is clearly like symbolic, mythological, theological, clearly referencing, it's clearly an Asherah reference to Eve. Mother goddess Eve.
I just made this kind of connection there too. So the origins of these monotheistic religions include this, this origin story where, Adam and his first wife split, and, she's a very powerful person. And then he goes for like the younger, more submissive. Like, how often do we see that play out in life these days? Like the men get to a certain point, they like don't want to deal with this like
Boss
strong,
bitch,
powerful
man.
woman.
I am
They're
done
like,
with the
I
boss
want
bitch.
the young submissive
I
one,
want the
right?
young submissive one. Exactly.
But then she still, even the young submissive one, Eve, she still gets blamed. And like that way she can be blamed for everything because she's still sort of like too young and naive to know what's really going on.
Pretty
Yeah.
much. So could the forbidden fruit be cannabis? It matches the description. So this is from Genesis 3, verses 6 and 7. I argue that this is explicitly a description of marijuana. So when the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye, and also desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some and ate it. She also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it. Then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they realized they were naked. So they sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves. So the fruit of the tree was good for food. Check. Cannabis seeds are among the most nutritious seeds found anywhere in nature, valued by humans, animals, and birds. The woman saw the plant was pleasing to the eye. Check. Cannabis is widely regarded as a beautiful, attractive plant. The plant is desirable for gaining wisdom. Cannabis has long been used in religion and ritual, valued for its capacity to promote shamanistic insight and meditative reflection. Adam and Eve ate the fruit and their eyes were opened. They realized they were naked. They ate the cannabis, got high, and had ideas. It is a classic entheogenic experience. Then they sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves, i.e., they used the hemp fibers to sew clothes, which is the beginning of weaving. So I think all of this stuff points exactly towards cannabis, like 100%. And then they're saying, the God is saying in these new traditions, it ain't sacred anymore. None of your sex and drug stuff. We're shutting it down, ladies. You can keep weaving, but you're not going to ritualize it anymore.
I mean, they certainly wouldn't want anybody, not just women, but they sure don't want anybody to have like sort of, spiritual awakenings, a deeper sort of experience of wisdom and intuition, and that sort of like shamanistic way of, seeing and knowing, because then it flies in the face of everything that Yahweh wants.
Yes. More importantly, it's that the priests want to put themselves between you and the divine. They want to be the intermediaries. They do not want you, the Orthodox, as the way Christianity came to be, they don't want you having your personal relationship to the divine that bypassed the priesthood. That's why they got rid of the entheogenic drugs all along. That's why they hated cannabis and psychedelics all along, and why they hated the Gnostics, because the Gnostics were all about a personal relationship with the divine that does not have any priesthood intermediary. You do not need
Yeah.
to go to the priesthood. Guess what the priesthood doesn't like? That idea. They don't like that idea at all. They're like, you got to come through us. You got to come through us. And all these ecstatic experiences, whether it doesn't have to be drugs, sex and drugs is part of it, but like any kind of ecstatic stuff, singing and dancing that like gets you high and out of body and has a personal relationship. They don't want you doing any of that stuff. That's why the Christians are usually so staid and proper and like sober, some sects get wild, but most of the time, most Christianity, most of the time is quiet and meditative, no booty shaking, no dancing. Some groups do, but like most of the time, not.
Yeah,
And
it's not even necessarily meditative. The whole thing is it's sanitized.
right. And controlled.
Yeah.
And they don't want any of the wild stuff. Not because it doesn't work, but because it undermines their authority. All right. So this is the
Exactly.
last bit I've got. This is when I also see cannabis, and I also did not invent this one either. So in the book of Revelations, could cannabis be the tree of life, yielding its 12 crops of fruit every month? We will do a dedicated topic on this book of Revelations later on. But this is Revelations 22 is the last chapter of the Bible. This is the very end, after all the apocalyptic, after all the end time stuff, after all the bad stuff happens. This is the salvation that comes at the very end when Jesus comes back. So this is the good news. The very end of the Bible, the last chapter, last page. Then the angel showed me the river of the water of life, as clear as crystal, flowing from the throne of God. We're going to come back to that. The throne of God and of the Lamb down the middle of the great street of the city. On each side of the river stood the tree of life, bearing 12 crops of fruit, yielding its fruit every month, and the leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nations. No longer will there be any curse. The throne of God and of the Lamb will be in the city, and his servants will serve him. They will see his face, and his name will be on their foreheads. So, on each side of the river stood the tree of life, bearing 12 crops of fruit, yielding its fruit every month, and the leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nations. Many people have pointed to that as cannabis, because cannabis has this incredible variety of products, of hemp products, fiber products, drug products, seed products, food, so many different crops. And it does yield them year round, especially in the modern time when you've got greenhouse growing and indoor growing. You're literally yielding it, every month. And
Grows
the
crystals
leaves of the
too.
tree are for the healing of nations. It really speaks to like the political stuff and the prohibition and how marijuana leaf became this big political symbol of both drug prohibition and of the counterculture. So it's a very political symbol, globally, internationally. Everybody knows the symbol of the marijuana leaf. Everybody knows what that. Every adult does, and the leaves of the tree could be for the healing of the nations. We bring back the mother goddess that heals the nations and the sacred plants. So I view this as like very reaffirming. Comments, sir?
I think it's pretty good. Also, a lot of cannabis plants can have 12 branches, symbolized with the 12 tribes of Israel. There's a strand that they have made today, and it's a Jewish strain, and it looks like they're Jewish candles. It's made to grow exactly the same as their Jewish candles. Yeah, and that is awesome. So I think you're spot on with this 100%. Like, this goes back to ancient rites, and cannabis grows crystals on it. Even today, they're like, oh, look at those crystals on it. So it was used for weaving, eating, as you said, medical uses, one of the first cultivated plants by human beings. Amazing. And even with the cannabis plant itself, it can be male, it can be female, and it can be both. It can be transgender.
And it's the female is the one you want, though. The female cannabis plants are the more powerful one.
Yeah.
So you kill the males and keep the females.
But of course.
But then also there's great mother goddess stuff, and I only just noticed this recently.
Mm-hmm.
So you got the river of the water of life that's clearly like, nature based.
And birthing.
But flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb. Now the Lamb is Jesus, God is God, but the throne is the goddess. That is one of the titles of Isis. One of her most important titles.
Isis, yeah.
Of Isis is the throne. She's the throne upon which the Pharaoh sits. She's the whole earth, right? She's the mother goddess. She is the material world. She is Mother Earth. And so God sits in the throne that is material, that is coming from her. It is. So this is really important in Egyptian mythology. Usually she has a sun disk headdress, but sometimes she has a throne headdress.
Yeah. She has several of them, and one of them is a throne. And that's what it's meant to symbolize and look like.
So when they talk about the throne of God, that is the mother goddess. So it's the mother, the father, and the son. So God is the father sitting with the throne, and their son is the Lamb, is Jesus. And this is the Trinity of Mother, Father, Son right there. The book of Revelations is telling it to ourselves. It tells us itself. The end times is the end of monotheism and when the mother returns. That's their own built-in eschatology of the end times, is simply the end of one chapter of history and the beginning of the next chapter of history. And I think it's going to be when the mother returns, because when the mother returns, it's going to be the end of monotheism as a concept. And because you can't have the mother and monotheism, it doesn't work. So, but she never went away. The monotheism never completely ruled totally. So, and now she's bursting back out, and they knew there was going to come a day when she came back. And so they knew there was going to be a day when because they locked her in the closet, right? They didn't get rid of her. They just locked her in the closet. She's like kicking and screaming in there. They knew there was going to come a day in the future when she came bursting back out. And that was going to be the end times for them. Because like there's so much symbols in Revelations about this, the whore of Babylon and the seven-headed beast. The whore of Babylon, I mean, that's Ishtar. I mean, that's a title, right? That's not an insult. That's a title she wore proudly. The courtesan of the gods. We'll talk. We'll do a whole dedicated topic on Revelations eventually, but I really think that this one is Cannabis also. Then I didn't write it up, but my third, I've got 3 versions, is that Cannabis is with the resurrection of Jesus, that the wine vinegar that they served Jesus on the cross is a cannabis narcotic that knocks him out and fakes his death, that the women did it, that the women are responsible for the resurrection because they gave him this mystery potion that gets labeled as wine vinegar, but nobody knows what wine vinegar is. It's a mystery potion that makes Jesus succumb and look like he's dead. They bring him down off the cross before he's actually dead very quickly. He's only on the cross a short time. Bring him down off the cross, carefully nurse his wounds, carefully revive him a day and a half later. And it's all the women. The women did it. They're not just witnesses. They're fully responsible. That's my Jesus resurrection story that we will dive into when we get there. But that's the one I actually want to like animate and turn into like an animated short story. If anyone who does animations out there that's listening on the one viewer, hey, one viewer, do you do animations? If so, call me.
Regarding this text that you got up too, it's very intimate, very sexual as well, with the mother, father, and the son, child being birthed by the mother, father as well, in the intimate moment. Sitting on the throne as well seems very intimate to me as well.
The beautiful vision.
I think it's a beautiful vision too. And to observe throne as Isis just completely changes the entire tenor of the entire thing. It's like that's what Goddess Bible Study is all about. This is what the essence of Goddess Bible Study is like. Unearth all these little references, hidden references to the goddess that are poking through, hiding in plain sight. That just we're not trained to see them. We're just not trained to read it that way. We're not trained to recognize that symbolism.
Another thing about this vision, I think that's really potent and beautiful and important to note is it flies in the face of all of this sort of like not just so much industrialization anymore, but like the data age and like we have to make more data centers all over the place and and the data centers are like sucking up all the water and the energy and the resources and taking over huge pieces of earth, right? And in this vision, it's like we're going back to being more agricultural and like tribal and living in a more of like a village type scenario. And right, like what Nathan was saying, it feels more intimate because it seems to me that if you're going back to that way of life, you're living a more intimate life with the people around you because you're all relying more on one another. You're pulling resources together, and you're also living more intimately with the earth and the cycles of the goddess and nature.
Yes, I firmly believe we can have an ecological civilization, that as Western civilization crumbles, we need to have a vision for what comes next. And what I propose is ecological civilization as a replacement for Western civilization, and that there's a new framework of ideas. I'm 1000% an optimist on environmental issues, that 98% of our environmental problems are eminently solvable with today's technology. Certainly, we can get, normatively speaking, clean air, soil, and water if we chose to, if we wanted to, if we actually placed a priority on it as a society and devoted some resources to it. We could have clean air, soil, and water in a heartbeat. We just don't prioritize it. And other countries are even worse than America. America is not even that bad compared to other parts of the world. It's not impossible with today's technology and to have, technological civilization. It's just that we don't make a vision of it. But that's my vision. Goddess, his Mother Earth, is ecology. So an ecological civilization is one that is, right in the very name, is one that puts the mother first and puts the principles of like circularity and regenerativeness like as first principles, as moral principles. That clean air, soil, and water are moral principles just as much as like not stealing and raping and punching people in the face when you walk down the street. That like we should all be held to an account of simply clean air, soil, and water. It's like there are solutions for this stuff. we can totally have our cake and eat it too. Like, we're not running out of resources. The sky's not falling. We just got to stop doing the bad stuff and start doing it right, and we can have our cake and eat it too, man. I'm totally an optimist. I really am. Just, it's all gonna be a shitstorm in the near term. We got to survive the shitstorm and like build what comes next. Like, that's what I want to do. That's what I want to be a part of.
Yeah.
We can't, the house is on fire. We're not going to save the house that's on fire right now. And I don't really even want to. Like, let's rebuild what comes next, man.
100%. Totally. I think, I mean, we've sort of talked about this anyway, but just to bring it up again, because it goes with that idea is, clearly the whole world being so dependent on gas and oil is a big mistake, and it's not sustainable. And we're
I
all
actually have an
seeing,
entirely different analysis on this than you do, than the conventional
yeah,
wisdom.
we clearly are too dependent on it and we shouldn't be so dependent on it, because like we could be doing solar, we could be doing wind, we could be doing so many other things, right? And we're finding out that we're all interconnected even more, right? I mean, we've known this, but just for one little spot on the earth where the Strait of Hormuz is affecting everybody throughout the world, and economically and so on. And with energy being the way it is, I think like this is the moment of we can't be reliant on gas and oil anymore.
See, actually, I'm gonna argue against you. I actually make my living doing this stuff. I do renewables like for a living, and I'm an energy professional. I've been doing it for a long time. And speaking as a deep green environmentalist, I've been trying to make this argument to people for a long time now, for more than a decade. Natural gas is our best friend. Natural gas is biological, it's non-toxic, it's perfectly fine, and it is a wholesale replacement for coal and oil. It's totally renewable. It is wildly abundant. We will never run out of natural gas. We have more natural gas than we have coal and oil combined. It's spread all over the world. We have so much bloody natural gas. We're already moving into the era of natural gas. Really, the future belongs to nuclear and natural gas. I mean, that's the physics is determinative with renewables on the margins. But we have so much methane. The liberals are dead wrong to be opposed to natural gas. We have so much natural gas that we could leave all the coal and oil on the ground, and we will never run out for thousands of years because it's so wildly abundant and so readily renewable. And because Mother Goddess loves us so much, it's already actually methane is the metabolical source of all life on Earth. It's like the source of the food chain is built off of the methane hydrate seeps on the ocean floor, feeds the bacteria, which begins, and then the bigger critters eat the bacteria, and then the shrimp come along, and then the plankton come along, and the fish eat the plankton. The basis of the food chain is actually natural gas, is methane on the seafloor. And that this could be the metabolic pathway for an ecological civilization. Natural gas is good. It's non-toxic. It doesn't harm the water. When the Nord Stream pipeline blew up, it didn't harm anybody or anything. There's no oil spills. LNG is fantastic. No environmental problems whatsoever as long as it doesn't catch fire. It's not a bomb. It's relatively safe. It's got a great track record. LNG is awesome. Natural gas is awesome. I've been telling all my liberal friends since 2013. Nobody wants to hear it. Natural gas is great. Fracking is a huge success story, and it will never run out ever for 1,000 years, 10,000 years.
What you're saying is like no more oil, and so I'm talking about oil and gasoline, right? But I don't.
So we make all of our we can make. That's the thing about methane is you can make synthetic liquid fuels from natural gas. We already make synthetic diesel, synthetic jet fuel, synthetic whatever we need. That's superior to petroleum products. We don't need coal. We don't need petroleum. I mean, we always use some of it, but like we're also not running out. Like the peak oil thing is just not true. It's been totally busted. We can get to net zero by restoring our ecosystems and engaging with the carbon cycle. And then we have the technology to scrub down. This is why I'm optimistic about clean air and water. Clean coal works. We have the technology to scrub this stuff down to synthetics, break it down to its like raw molecular components and rebuild these molecules as non-toxic fuel products that are superior to the products we have today. I'm all for electrification. Electrification's great, but there's no free lunch on any of it. We still need the energy. And ultimately, we need all the energy we can get. In the long run, it's going to come from nuclear and natural gas. That's where 1,000 years from now, unless there's a physics breakthrough, it'll be nuclear and natural gas for the next 1,000 years. I guarantee you. I make my living doing this stuff. The physics is determinative. And the liberals who think we're going to run the world on wind and solar they're just dead wrong. They got the engineering wrong. They have the economics wrong. They're like going to be discredited. It's really like two separate conversations about energy going on in the world today. And the liberals flat out do not listen to people that don't agree with them. They just won't listen. They just don't listen. And they're like, you're a fossil fuel apologist. We don't listen to you. It's like, all right, well then keep on being wrong. But natural gas is great. It doesn't kill the birds, doesn't kill the fish. It's fine.
I appreciate this like mini sort of lesson in understanding more about natural gas and methane, because these are things I don't know so much about.
I really want to illustrate this story too, and illustrate how the carbon cycle and a circular economy can work. Because if we have robust ecosystems, we get to net zero in a heartbeat. The Earth's carbon cycle is so much bigger than the carbon we're putting in the air. You know, we can do industrial carbon capture on specific locations to have like, untoward quantities coming out. We can do industrial carbon capture. That stuff works. I traveled all over the world doing industrial carbon capture and investigating sites. I really do know kind of what I'm talking about here. And I would love to illustrate this and do an animated short piece that like illustrated my vision, because I've been trying to explain to people for years and nobody fucking wants to hear it.
Ed.
Well, the right wingers, actually, when I was working in DC for a while trying to do political work, the liberals, and I'm a liberal, right? All my friends are Green Party types. The liberals wouldn't want to hear it, but all the right wingers were going to hire me. They're like, oh, come on in. We got work for you. But I didn't want to be a right winger. And then Trump got elected. So I bagged out on that whole chapter of my career. But yeah, because of the pro gas guys, they understand we're not running out. It's like there's so much of it. We have no idea how much there is. It's ridiculous. We'll never run out.
The non-toxic part should be like a necessary thing, or thinking you'd be aiming for it.
Well, I was trying to sell the gas guys. I was like, you should advertise the fact that this is non-toxic. And they're like, what? Why would we do that? It's just crazy. Like they couldn't have cared less about the environmental shit. Window dressing, they would do the window dressing for it.
Mm-hmm.
Like they don't care about the environment, and the left wingers don't care about like reality. It's just so I don't know. That's why I quit politics. Then I just argue about medical marijuana for a couple of years. Now I argue about Mother Goddess. But I make my living doing solar. I do industrial solar, industrial battery systems. Like I do this shit every day, man. Data centers and all about that stuff too.
I have solar. My house is powered by solar.
Well, in Virginia, you must have paid for it yourself because there's no good credits in Virginia. Well, there was the federal tax credit, but
it actually came with the house when I bought it, and so I just pay a small monthly fee to be hooked into the grid.
Oh, nice. Yeah, cool. Yeah, it's all paid for. That's great. Solar is expensive up front. But so yeah, believe me, I price these projects every day. It's crazy how much it costs.
We're actually trying to stop doing gas here in Australia for a lot of houses and stuff. I've got gas here, so
it's so retarded. The whole like anti-natural gas infrastructure campaign by liberals is just so dumb. God, the New York State gas ban is so dumb. God, it drives me nuts. But none of my friends, I'm like so out of step with all of my left-wing friends because all my friends are left-wingers. And they're like, what are you talking about? We all hate fracking. I'm like, I think fracking is great.
So weird. But if we could just all get on board, because I am pagan, I'm an animist, I'm a goddess worshiper, I'm a priestess of the goddess, and this, I could totally get on board with this vision here at the end of the Bible. And so that could be the place where I could really connect to all of these Christians who I'm like, what, look at what you believe. But this is beautiful.
I
If
think
we
it's a
could
great
all
point.
get on board, huh?
I think it's a great point. And like, I think it's one of my favorite passages in the entire Bible. I think it's one of the most important passages in the Bible.
Yeah.
And I think it's very visionary. Like we could literally, illustrate this picture alone. And I've been thinking about that too. That's one of the AI images I want to do, is just exactly that. I should play with that. And then and again, if you make the point that the throne is the goddess, and that inverts the whole thing, and it shows a trinity of Mother, Father, Son. God, I think it's so beautiful, man. So beautiful. That's definitely the vision
Even
that animates me.
you could pick up from here, this last verse of the Bible, and use it as the beginning of what is to come, what comes next, what comes after all of this, right?
Exactly.
Because if it is all changing, and clearly it's all changing, and everything's sort of being like razed to the ground and like blown up, it's all chaotic, like, and it has to change, then this is a great place to start. Like, let's get to this. And then how does this play out? What does this vision look like? How do we get there? And what do we do to make that happen?
Totally. Yeah. Start from here as the
Yeah.
beginning of the vision. I think that's exactly right. 100% agree with you. And I mean, it's really way I've thought about it for a long time. Because even as a kid, I was like, what does the end times mean? Like, does that mean like the whole universe blows up? Or is it just the end of one chapter of history? I was like, oh, that's just gonna be the end for the Christians. It just means we won't be any more Christianity. And like, that's the way I've thought about it since I was a child.
But as Generation X, we were brought up with, like drills and, the Cold War and everything. And we watched whatever that movie was
The
where
day
they showed
after,
us like this,
the, day-
this is, yeah, this is what happens when the bomb drops, right? And so I, not being raised Christian, not knowing like the end times or whatever, always figured like it was going to be a bomb, like a
right.
nuclear bomb. But
Well, I think
it
plenty of people
goes,
think that.
I mean, but it goes along with the nihilistic sort of ideology or ideation of, like the Christians want the end times and
Right.
and everything. So it all goes along really well together.
This gets into that the Antichrist discussion we were having on the chat group about, is Trump the Antichrist?
Right.
The Antichrist is a false leader, a false teacher who like brings about oblivion, who's really, really popular, but then like is a total deceiver, and he's involved with the third temple, and he brings about oblivion and Armageddon. Is that not like Trump and or Netanyahu? You could make the case for either one of these guys.
Yeah, fits the narrative for sure.
If they touch the third temple, my God, it really is. Like, I've been watching the news every day, like waiting for them to blow that thing up. I'm sure they're trying. But Truth Seeker Man says, hello all. Hello. Thank you. Not a huge audience, but we cherish every last audience member, all 8 of you. Some of these, I don't advertise this stuff at all. I don't post it anywhere really. Like, it's purely like the better episodes get like over 100 views.
I gave it a share.
With like nothing, with no effort on my part to promote it. But yeah, like the vision, what comes next? I'm all about it. What comes next? And we are just in these crazy historical times. I mean, and Trump's just so badly fucked up, and it's all, the house is on fire bigly. He's on fire bigly. He's going to get run out of town by his own people, I think, by the time this is all said and done.
His wife didn't even defend him.
She's like, it ain't me either. Hey, look, there's Josh right here at the end.
Crashing the party, everybody. At the very end. I've been listening for the last, 10 minutes or so.
That's cool. Glad to have you here.
Yeah, even if I don't know if you're wrapping up, but I just want to say hi to everyone.
Well, we were talking about this. This is, if you want to talk, this is the last, Revelations 22:2, the last verse of the Bible. last chapter. Then the angel showed me the river of the water of life, as clear as crystal, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb. We're saying the throne is the goddess. So mother, father, son. The throne of God and of the Lamb, down the middle of the great street of the city. On each side of the river stood the tree of life, cannabis, bearing its 12 crops of fruit, yielding its fruit every month. And the leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nations. And then there again says throne of God and of the Lamb down below. So we were saying how like the vision of what comes next after Armageddon, the mother returns and the throne of God and of the Lamb, the Trinity of Mother, Father, Son, and the clean air, soil, and water, and the sacred plants returning. A vision of what comes next.
Well, I definitely have to rewind this episode and go to the beginning and see the connection that you're making from the tree of life being the cannabis plant. Is that what that's what you're?
Yes, because the tree of life is bearing its 12 crops of fruit. Cannabis has loads of different crops. Fruit every month. Cannabis totally does that in the modern day context of indoor growing. And the leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nations, and all the political element of like prohibition and, the marijuana leaf is totally a political symbol globally of oppression and unjust abuse by the governments and of war on nature. And the cannabis leaf could totally be a political symbol for healing internationally. I think so. I've always thought so.
Amazing.
Potheads unite. It's bigger than a labor union. If all
the comment, by the way, was
together,
one piece from my Gnostic Union. That was Michael. He's really cool. I have to link you up one day. If you want an extra guest on the show, I'm sure he'll be honored to join. He's really cool. He loves the goddess as well.
All right.
No, it's a great passage from that last chapter, and the throne of God obviously being clearly a symbol of what we could say the goddess. All the ancient images show that she is a throne with the child sitting on her lap. It's very clearly there, no doubt about it. Not even a stretch.
Yeah, and if we were talking how it's like explicitly with Isis, it's one of the she has different headdresses she wears, one of which is like a throne, like literally a throne on her hat.
Right. No, beautiful.
Edward, I just have my sister here for now. I'm going to give her a hand with something. So I'm going to make a quick bookity. Thank you so much for having me. And it's always a privilege seeing you, Edward, and speaking to you and listening to you and learning from you. And it was lovely seeing you as well, Lisa, and especially you, Joshua, in the last minute.
Yeah.
Have a lovely day, everyone. Bless you
all. Glad to see everybody.
Beautiful people.
Always appreciate everything you
much.
share. Thank you.
Thank you, Nathan.
See you, Nathan.
See you next time.
Or bye.
Yeah, I can hang out for a few minutes. I don't have anything else to,
So what were the, not that you need to rehash it, but what were the good gems of the conversation tonight? As a good summary to close it down, I guess. I'll be the initiator of the summary.
Well, we were talking about this.
Oh yeah, that's the pedestals for the god and goddess in an ancient temple, right?
Yeah, in Tel Arad, and this is the recreation that's in the Israeli Museum in Jerusalem. And so they don't repeat. There's clearly the space there for the second standing stone, but then they don't put it up in the museum version. You can go to your actual site as a tourist, but this is in the museum in Jerusalem. And so the museum in Jerusalem, they don't have the Asherah standing stone because they don't want to offend the sensibilities of the general public.
Amazing.
But yeah, we were just talking about how frankincense, myrrh, and cannabis are so closely associated with one another, in practice and in the literature, mixed together. They smell amazing. They're intoxicating incense of the highest order. And we have this etymological argument, but now we've got the archaeological evidence. And then
have your studies come across much of, I know, for example, like the poppy is very addictive, and obviously you have to be very careful with that, but it shows up everywhere in the ancient world.
Poppies are all over the place too. Absolutely.
Everywhere.
And cannabis and opium are used side by side since ancient times. Hashish and opium can mix together. And
Do you see
Talked
the
about
poppy?
Hezbollah,
Talk about
because like
Hezbollah.
Hezbollah, who's like, growing cannabis and making hash. I'm like, aren't they doing poppy and opium too? Like
Yeah, in the
they're
Bekaa Valley of Lebanon, which has been it's an agricultural breadbasket, but it's a drug breadbasket and has been since ancient times. And so Hezbollah has been in control of the weed trade in Lebanon since the 80s. And they make pretty good money from it.
Yeah, it's a big income producer for them. And they have lots of control over that. Like, if I understand correctly, if they find that there are other farmers around that are trying to grow, like they'll either kill them or like destroy their crops or
Yeah,
what
those
have you.
guys, they don't mess around.
No.
No, if you're living under Hezbollah control, I think you're going to do what they tell you. As a rule.
Yeah.
But they're really up into it nowadays. They're really fighting like mad as we speak. It's really a damn shame. It's really absolutely fucking awful, frankly.
Forgive my ignorance on this, Ed, but cannabis naturally indigenous all around the world, or is it?
No, it comes from Central Asia. No, they know exactly where it comes from. It comes from Central Asia.
Oh, we've discussed that before, actually.
It comes from Afghanistan, really. And then it spread. By the time of the Neolithic, it was already in the Fertile Crescent in the Neolithic. So the fiber and drug crops were in China and in the Fertile Crescent since like early Neolithic times. Then it really spreads with horse riding because horses also come from the same area of Central Asia, and horses also like cannabis. And so the ropes from the hemp fibers were used to like corral horses. And so the horse riding peoples really helped spread a lot of it that wasn't already spread already. But really, there's always been a trade good throughout Eurasia. It was not in the Americas. So let's just be clear. It was not in the Americas until the colonial era, but it came on the first boats like Columbus. Every boat, because every boat is made from cannabis.
Yeah.
Like all the fibers and ropes and rigging and stuff. So they brought hemp seeds with them. Every sailor from Europe, they were throwing hemp seeds down to like get replacement fibers. But it was not in the Americas prior to the year 1600. It's kind of interesting.
But those wouldn't have been the psychoactive plant. They wouldn't have used those for any.
That's an interesting question. So that it's geographically spread. And in the northern climates, you get the fiber type. So in Europe and in most of China, it's the fiber types that are not good for drugs. And then south of the Himalayas, you get the drug types that are not used for fiber. But then there's a middle region, which is the original region where you're getting both. And so the Bekaa Valley of Lebanon is in this middle part where you're getting both fiber and drugs in the same location. And all throughout the Fertile Crescent is pretty much all like that. But south of there, Egypt was mainly drugs, not fiber. Europe was all fiber and not drugs. So when the Spanish went to Mexico and they were planting fiber types in the 1500s, this is documented, they're explicitly planting fiber types, but then the crops, think about hemp is like easy plant to grow, very difficult crop to harvest and turn into anything useful. It's like super labor intensive and skillful. You got to do it right. So the drugs and the fibers both, if you're not doing it right, you're not getting a good crop. And so it's super labor intensive. So all these crops get abandoned and they just go to weed. And so they planted hemp. The Spanish colonists planted fiber hemp in the 1500s in Mexico and abandoned it. And by the 1700s, the indigenous people had turned it into a drug type. And no one knows where it came from. And no one knows if it happened because of cultivation or because of latitude or why. It's kind of a botanical mystery. But by the 1700s, anyway, you've got Spanish literature about plants, like Spanish scientific literature. They're describing marijuana in the 1700s as an indigenous drug plant that the Spanish Catholics were totally terrified of.
That's fascinating.
And there's a really fascinating history in Mexico.
Yeah.
Of how you get this cultural divide between the indigenous and the Spanish Catholics, because the indigenous totally dug it, and it's got all the same sex and drugs and music associations and plant medicine associations. And the Spanish Catholics were like, get away, devil. And like, they were totally horrified by it. It has this sinister reputation from the 18th century in Mexico among the Catholics.
So do you think that the properties of the psychoactive qualities of this originally, they knew about it, or do you think like it's like ayahuasca where they say that the plants spoke to them and taught them how to
Probably.
basically,
The plants
you know-
speak to us.
huh?
So the plants do speak to us. The plants do teach us. And so absolutely it could have been like the plants could have taught.
I mean, that's quite a story. I mean,
Yeah,
it's an
right.
amazing story if they would have not even known, and then the plants tell them, you know, the plant spirits speak to them and say, hey, actually, this was brought here. You guys didn't know anything about this, and this is psychoactive.
Here's the thing. You do not have to imbibe or ingest a plant and for it to be able to talk to you or you to communicate with it, because they will communicate with you. And so as somebody who studied indigenous herbalism, but for the plants medicine people from long time ago, which are herbalists, right? And like the healers and the shamans and so on, they always knew to talk to the plants and that the plant reveal itself. And then, I mean, I've even done, plant journeys with drinking violet flowers and tea and had amazing revelation and things revealed to me. So like you can, you can talk to the plants, and if you are willing to take a moment and like get connected, they will tell you what's up.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
This was one of these. This was actually one of these things that for most of my life, I never would have entertained such a wild, an idea. But then once you
did the plant speak to us?
You realize that they're conscious, it's just kind of wild. I mean, it's amazing we can live so many years of our life and just be absolutely ignorant of something that's like right under your nose.
I was this many years old when I learned how to wipe my ass.
Just amazing.
So Truth Seeker Man made a comment here, which I want to respond to. He said, didn't George Washington grow it? Speaking of the first president. Yes, this is another fabulous, fantastic story. So because hemp was so important as an industrial commodity, they needed it for shipbuilding. It was extremely important because they needed it for the Navy. And so it was a chief concern throughout the colonial era was securing hemp supplies, all of which, by the way, came from Russia. Russia supplied all of colonial hemp to the British, the French, the Dutch, the Americans. It all came from Russia because they had the serf labor that they spent 2 years producing the highest quality marine grade fiber hemp that nobody else in the world produced it. And other qualities of hemp weren't trusted. So the Americans made a point. American shipbuilders would only build with Russian hemp. That said, they experimented with growing it domestically, and the plant grows great, but they never had the labor or the skills needed to produce the marine quality would satisfy naval concerns. So George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, all these guys, they grew it on there, but they were growing fiber hemp. And so George Washington was very meticulous with his gardening and kept diaries and farm journals and all this stuff. So we have all these records from like early in his life, from like the 1760s, and he abandoned the crop ultimately because it wasn't making any money on it, and it was cheaper to grow tobacco and trade for fiber hemp. Instead of trying to grow fiber hemp to like make clothes for his own slaves, it was cheaper just to grow tobacco and buy the clothes. And so they abandoned hemp, and he gives his finances and how much he was losing on it and all this stuff. Very meticulous records. That said, later in his life, in the 1790s, while he was president, he's serving as president in Philadelphia, and his home is in Mount Vernon. And he's writing these letters back to his gardener in Mount Vernon in the 1790s, late in his life, because he dies. He stops being president in 1800 and immediately dies. So Washington did not. So these letters are like the very end of his life. And he's writing all these letters. What are you doing with the Indian hemp? It's more valuable than the common hemp. Make sure to plant it and save the seeds. And he explicitly describes Indian hemp. Now, Indian hemp was brand new in those days because in the 1700s was the first time that the Europeans were sailing to India and discovering all these drug types of cannabis, and it totally blew their mind. So you got all this literature from the 1700s when the European explorers are discovering all these drugs that are like, and they're getting high on them and writing these letters back. And they're also saying like, hey, can you Indian laborers, can you guys grow some hemp for us? And the laborers were like, fuck no, that stuff is like way too much work. We're not doing that. You go, we have they had other fiber crops that they used. So they had no interest in growing fiber hemp in India, but they grew all the drug types. So they got the name India hemp, or Cannabis indica was the drug types, and Cannabis sativa is the European fiber types. And those names are now meaning something different in the modern day. But in those days, India hemp meant drug types. And all of the 1800s, if you're talking about India hemp, it was the drug types, and sativa was the fiber types. So George Washington is explicitly talking about growing India hemp, the drug types, while he is acting as our first president of the United States. He is the first marijuana farmer in America in 1796, while he was acting as our first president. That's so says Ed. But I've done all this research. I've written it up.
Did you come across that on your own research? Oh, sorry, Lisa, go ahead.
No, so like what I'm wondering, because I know that
Yes,
they
I did
were
do my
all
own original research.
all those guys were growing back then, and I'm pretty sure my people, the Adamses, like of the presidents, John and John Quincy,
Oh,
they
the Adams family, Adamses.
yeah, literally owned pretty much everything you think of as Northern Virginia and like the
Right.
Tyson's Corner area. But they probably were growing too. But at what point and why did it become like problematic and outlawed?
Great question. Why do we have drug prohibition? So,
Yeah.
the answer is because of opium. All through the 1800s, they only outlawed cannabis because they outlawed opium first. They never would have done it on cannabis on its own. All through the 1800s, opium was like the single biggest revenue moneymaker for the British East India Company. And they were selling drugs like they were the British were the biggest drug dealers of the 1800s, of the 19th century. And so they were selling drugs like mad, the French and the Dutch too, all throughout the Pacific Rim to undermine all these Asian countries and colonize them and steal from them. And so what they were doing, the British in particular, were growing opium in India and selling it in China. And the Chinese, and then getting silver in return for the opium, which the Chinese were not happy about because the Chinese already had their own opium and already had their own opium problem. And they did not want to import opium from India. The Chinese government was totally opposed to it. And they sure as hell did not want to buy it with silver. Like, maybe we'll trade for tea for you, but like, we're not going to give you our silver. Well, the British came in and they did the opium wars. There was two of them, one in the 1840s, one in the 1850s. And they literally blasted open the port of Shanghai. They came in with their gunboat diplomacy. They brought in their gunboats into the port of Shanghai and blasted them until the Chinese, said uncle and gave them a trading base in Shanghai. And then the French and the Dutch followed soon after. And the British forced them to start take their opium sales against the Chinese will. And this is the beginning of the Chinese century of humiliation. And so the British made mad money all through the 1800s, selling opium all over the world. And so this became
isn't laudanum derived from the same thing? And so I know that was like really problematic, and a lot of people were just sort of tipping back like constantly. It was it's highly addictive, right?
Yeah. So, right. And so as you get into the late 1800s, like the 1880s, 1890s, in America, alcohol taverns were sex segregated. So respectable women were not allowed in taverns. Brothel girls, the tavern wenches, were allowed in the taverns, but respectable married women were not allowed in the taverns. It was a men's club only. But women could get opiates from their doctors. They got other stuff from their doctors too, of a sexual nature, but specifically they got opiates. And so there was a rash of opium addiction among respectable middle-class white women in the 1800s. It was a big social problem. In the 1870s, 1880s, 1890s, respectable white women addicted to opiates was a big problem. So as you get to like the year 1900, the turn of the century, the very first international meetings about anything that would later on become the League of Nations, and like the forums that would turn into the League of Nations later on, were originally drug control meetings, but sponsored by the Chinese and the Americans to control the British drug trade, because the British were so rampant with selling drugs all over the place that the other countries banded together to try and get the British to at least put some reins on it. So it was the Chinese and the Americans that convened in like 1907, 1915. There's a series of them that ultimately in 1925 was the first thing signed. That's when they formed the League of Nations, was 1925. And the first thing they signed was a drug control treaty. And it was all about opium. Everybody was concerned about opium, but they had all these countries. At this point, they had like 60 countries taking part in these meetings. And at some point in these meetings in the early 1920s, the Egyptians and the Turks had said, hey, if you're going to outlaw opium, they were Muslim countries. They were all on board with outlawing the opium. And said, if you're going to outlaw opium, you got to outlaw hashish as well, because hashish looks just like opium. You can't tell them apart. And they're used side by side by the same people. And so if you're going to outlaw opium, we got to outlaw hashish as well. Most of the Europeans didn't even know what hashish was, but they're like, whatever, sign it on. And so hashish prohibition gets tacked on at the last minute as like an add-on to opium controls, which were the point of the whole thing, was the opium controls. And that becomes a League of Nations, and then these things get encoded into international drug control. By the way, the United States did not sign that 1925 treaty, even though they'd been involved in negotiations all along. The Americans actually wanted harsher rules. And so the Americans didn't sign on to the League of Nations, but all the other countries did. So that's 1925. The Americans don't outlaw marijuana until 1937. So they were actually late to the game. It was already outlawed internationally prior to being outlawed by the Americans. And the Mexicans led the way. The Mexicans banned marijuana in 1920, way ahead of the Americans. They really hated marijuana way before the Americans did. So the Americans have a very limited view of the world outside of America, and they think drug war comes from America and was opposed on the rest of the world. It's not true. Drug control is an international thing. Other countries have been much more harsh with it than America ever was. The Muslim countries are way more harsh. Singapore and shit, Turkey, they were like way more harsh. And as bad as the Americans were, other parts of the world were way rougher.
Well, we saw that in Afghanistan. Once the U.S. troops got there, the poppy fields went back up.
Well, so that's the thing. Opium funding armies never went away.
Yeah.
And so as the Americans picked it up, the baton from the British and the French, who had been using it in Vietnam and been using it elsewhere. And so the CIA has been systematically promoting opium production since the day they were invented in the 1940s. It funded Chiang Kai-shek and the Chinese nationalists. It funded the Vietnam War. It funded Afghanistan against the communists, against the Soviet Union. And then cocaine did the same purpose in Central America. Everywhere they went to fight the communists, they used drug trade to fund insurgent armies everywhere they went. And the only thing that changed it was in the 21st century, we now have synthetic drugs coming out of China and not plant-based drugs coming by the CIA. But yeah, the CIA was the biggest drug dealer of the entire 20th century. They picked up the baton from the British, and they never stopped doing it, even as they ran the drug control as a racket, because what ultimately ends up becoming is that the CIA outranks the DEA, Drug Administration. So the CIA can offer protection to any drug lord they want in exchange for soldiers, guns for drugs for soldiers. And so the CIA just like is a protection racket. They give a license to produce drugs to whatever kingpins that they want to work with. And they say, you got carte blanche to produce as much as you want, but you got to work with us. And they've been doing it all along. Hamid Karzai, the president of Afghanistan, his brother, while we were there in Afghanistan, was the biggest drug dealer in Asia. Like, that shit's not an accident.
Yeah, I remember that. I think the first book that I read about this that really opened my eyes was it Terence McKenna's Food of the Gods? Did you ever read that book?
Yeah, I read it a long time ago, yeah.
Yeah, I think it was that one. Wasn't it that?
I don't remember if he gets into all that, but there's a book called The Politics of Empire, or The Politics of Heroin by this guy, whose name has escaped me, but he first published in the 1970s. He was a grad student in the 1970s who like stumbled into like CIA drug running in Cambodia during the Vietnam War and they weren't really hiding it. They weren't. They were like happy to talk to him. Like it wasn't really like skullduggery. They're like, yeah, sure, that's what we're doing. And so we got all this firsthand testimony from all these CIA agents in the field. Like he was out in the field. Like he went out there for something else and then stumbled into the story and turned it into his PhD thesis. And then the CIA wouldn't let him publish it. And it threatened his entire grad school career in the 1970s. He eventually, I think he ended up going to Europe and he published the work. And now it's like, it's got his third edition and he eventually was able to come back to the United States. But like, yeah, he has all this firsthand accounts of like, General so-and-so put this many loads on CIA because the CIA got in trouble.
You know,
in the church hearings because they were actually putting the drugs on CIA-owned aircraft. Now they keep it at arm's length through middlemen and stuff. But in the 1960s and 70s, it was like they were putting kilos of heroin on CIA aircraft, running drugs down the mountain, running guns up the mountain, back and forth, and they weren't hiding it.
Yeah, not to mention all the things they were doing. You know, just psychological experiments on people with drugs and all the other stuff that were.
I mean, hi.
Yeah.
And then the LSD was released onto the public via Timothy Leary. CIA gave, or the intelligence network, CIA as a euphemism for intelligence services, broadly speaking, gave the LSD to Timothy Leary to give out and funded all these studies on Ivy League campuses in the early 70s of doing LSD on the students. Like that shit came out of the intelligence services to fuck with the public. Like they released genies, they released forces that were beyond their control, but they definitely were like doing it to fuck with the public and undermine the public and undermine the anti-war movement by making the anti-war movement into a bunch of drugged out fools that didn't have credibility and couldn't stop them. And it worked. It's worked. The drug shit has been such a racket all along, and it's totally worked to manipulate our entire society. And it's just one of the things they do to manipulate us.
That's somewhat of an enigma. I don't know if I fully understand that. Explain the logic to me. So they introduced psychedelics that make people more peaceful, more loving, more respectful of other cultures.
Intuitive.
Yeah.
Well, they didn't necessarily know what they're doing entirely, but they wanted the public like drugged out. Like the CIA is experimenting with these drugs also, like they're new to the CIA. So they're releasing this stuff in the public. They're trying to figure out if it works for mind control, figure out if they can use this directly. But if nothing else, just to bamboozle the public and make the anti-war folks look stupid in the eyes of conservatives. It looked like they're untrustworthy, not credible, not serious,
not productive,
and unproductive.
Yeah.
Like divide and conquer. That's how they do it. It's how the colonies did it. How the colonial powers did it for centuries. It's what they did to the Native Americans. Give booze to one group of natives and get them drunk and get them to fight a different group of natives. Divide and conquer. And the drugs and the alcohol and the LSD was new to the CIA, so they're like, oh, let's see what that does. But LSD is hard to make, so like only a handful of people made all of it. It's hard to make, but once you know how to make it, you make it in like 55-gallon drums.
Yeah.
So it was always coming from limited sources. It was always like a limited number of sources that produced all the LSD in the country, and it was being distributed through the Grateful Dead scene, where the Grateful Dead are just like useful idiots. And like, I love the Grateful Dead, but like, and they don't have to know anything, but like it's being manipulated. They're being manipulated. The whole rock and roll world was like a tool to distract the public.
So, and maybe this is for another episode, but how do, let's just call us, or what we'd like to think of ourselves as, pious goddess worshipers, how do we come into purging this drug culture, this false drug culture, and bringing these kinds of plants back into a non-CIA psyop cultural expression that we find ourselves in?
There's actually a lot of talk going on. There's a lot of talk going on about that, and I'm pretty outspoken about my own thoughts about those things. One of the people that I follow that I think is saying a lot of important things about at least like the abuses of some of the, like the plant medicines and so on is Luke Hogan, I think it is, on Instagram. But a lot of people are talking about we have to watch how much we're consuming these things. It's also some of it's very appropriative, right? Like, should you really be doing, say, ayahuasca if you're not native to that land or that continent? Like, there's a lot of things to consider about the ethics of it, and there's also some benefit to some of these things too that's obviously is really worthwhile. I mean, I had my first LSD trip at a Grateful Dead show, and it was like so beautiful and wonderful and amazing. And I'll never forget how great that was, right? And what all the drugs did, whether it's cannabis or what have you, especially back in the day when, Gen Xers, when we were young and we were trying it all out and having different understandings about reality, right? So the problem also comes with overuse and abuse, because a lot of people are seeking and want healing, and a lot of people are also seeking these like peak experiences. So they are going on all these retreats and doing all of these different plant medicines and so on, to the point where the actual overarching spirit of these plants, they each have their own. It's called a deva, right? DEVA. The plant deva for cannabis, the plant deva for ayahuasca, the plant deva that oversees each plant. Those are getting distorted. And we can see that too, especially with a lot of these hybrids with cannabis or whatever. Like, the amount of THC is like thousands more than it was back in my day when I was smoking pot, right, all the time as a young person, whatever. So it distorts the actual spirit of the plant deva, like that part of the plant that is divine. And that's where part of the big problem lies, because they're not being respected and honored. And people are also using it to bypass doing their actual shadow and spiritual work. So there's a lot of talk about this online, a lot of talk about this.
Yeah,
And of course,
it's a
ketamine comes in.
It's definitely Wild West. And so I think,
Yeah.
I mean, to the original question, I think, how do we make these plants sacred again and take them out of the realm of abuse, whether being pimped out by drug dealers or our own
It's out of the
addiction
bag, man.
and our
I'm
own
not sure how.
addictions. I'm guilty of a lot of this stuff myself. And like, cannabis is a great discussion point because the modern cannabis is like so high tech now. It's really a different can of worms now. Like vape pens in
The
high
same
school, like
thing.
we did not have vape pens when I was in high school, and I shudder to think what the effect of vape pens taking over the high schools.
Yeah,
which it basically is now. I mean,
yeah,
like,
Yes.
vape pens are everywhere, and you can't hide them. I mean, saying it's hopeless for the authorities to like catch every vape pen. I mean, it's like, if you think cigarettes was hard to stop, you definitely can't stop the vapes. So like, yeah, how do we as a culture get back to this stuff being sacred, more respectable? I mean, I do firmly believe that all these plants are for all of us. I mean, culturally speaking, I think they speak to us, and we're spreading the plants as much as the plants are helping us. The relationship is reciprocal. Like, humans spread cannabis all over the world. It's not just that the cannabis is helping us; we're helping it too. So, how do we get in these symbiotic relationships with the animals too, with agriculture, with the animals we eat? How do we get into a respectable symbiotic relationship that's mutually life affirming, even as we eat them? So these are deep philosophical questions. There is a lot. The plant medicine stuff is really wide open territory right now. All these psychedelic retreats, and because it can be dangerous, and there are charlatans, and there are well-meaning people that are just idiots, and you can get hurt. And
yeah, especially you women out there, be careful. Whoever might listen to this, there are a lot of sexual predators in that world.
Sexual
to be
predators.
Yeah,
aware
but
of.
people are legit like splitting off from themselves too. Like, psychically, mentally, and like a lot of people are either abusing or not getting the proper support, or they're taking too much of certain things, and they are having like a real legitimate psychosis issue and splitting off from themselves, and
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
disconcerting.
Yeah, the plants are powerful. They're absolutely powerful. It's like a car. It's a powerful thing. If you do it wrong, you just smash up the car and kill yourself, you know?
Well, you
Or
have
you-
to.
And so like you
Mhm.
gotta handle these things like carefully. And yeah, people are absolutely getting hurt out there. And we just live
You
in a
have to
crazy
think
time and people getting hurt in general.
Mhm.
when you think of like Eleusis, if those were truly psychedelic experiences, whatever they served in the Kikyan there, the people did not know how to make whatever that was in there. And if they had an experience, say it was opium or whatever, it's not like you could just the next day go get some more Kikyan. It was it was a controlled substance
Yeah,
in
absolutely.
Eleusis. I mean,
Yeah.
it was a very controlled substance.
Yeah,
So
controlled
it might,
substance provided by practitioners under very controlled settings,
yeah.
very ritualistically. Yeah,
So we
absolutely
have
not.
this idea that controlled substances are bad because it's taking away our freedom or access to these plants, and we definitely don't want to see it governed by white coats in a laboratory setting that's so synthetic. And you know, I guess the view of the future in goddess worship would be somewhere in the middle there, where it is still a controlled substance because we know how highly addictive these things are, but yet also how important they are.
Yeah, controlled doesn't mean banned. It just means like moderate, it means, moderated, regulated, whatever. But then you open up the door to like, the synthetic drugs, because like with the plant drugs, there was a case to be made for harm reduction and just like outright legalization and harm reduction as a practical strategy for society. But with the synthetic drugs, with crystal meth and fentanyl, like that is not a useful
Right.
paradigm at
Yeah.
all, and people are
Even
definitely getting hurt.
ketamine, there's so much bad that's going on, and apparently there's so many more things coming out so quickly, that are like fentanyl like or what have you, all these, quote designer, new chemical compounds that they can't even like they can't keep up with how many new and different ones are coming out now, and that's a real concern, especially for the young people.
Yeah,
Really
no, because like
disappointing.
when they write the laws, they've got to write the law to a specific molecule. This
Right.
molecule is banned for such a reason or whatever. They just tweak the molecule to like N3 instead of N4 or whatever, and
Right.
like tweak some little thing on it, and then it's a whole new molecule that there's no rules for it. It's therefore
And-
not illegal.
And sometimes that tweak is very deadly.
And sometimes that tweak is deadly. Exactly right.
100%. Yeah, yeah. But I think there's a lot to it as far as, like bringing things back into like wholeness and right practice and integrity and, that sort of thing. And, being specific about the use and the how and the when and the amount and under what circumstances. And, I think there's a lot to it, but thankfully there's a lot of people starting to really talk about this, and it's important conversation. I mean, like I said, even cannabis nowadays, like I can't imagine, like I think I would keel over if I had what's out there today, because it's so potent, and people, it's unfortunately a lot of people are having issues with it now because of that as well.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
not
I
the
mean, as a
kind bud of the early
Yeah.
90s.
No, as a cannabis advocate and legalization activist, I can't justify like dab rips of concentrates and having that be or like
Mhm.
doing that all day long. I mean, it's just so too much. It's just too much, man. It is not healthy. And
Yeah.
Well, I sometimes think that because things are outlawed, it actually causes people to be rebellious with these things.
that was definitely the case for me as a teenager. Like weed being illegal, like 100%.
Yeah,
like,
it's
that
like,
was
oh,
like
no.
half the fun was that it was like against the rules.
Yeah.
Like that was the whole point.
And strangely enough, the New Testament talks about this. St. Paul discusses this. I think it's in Romans or Galatians, that the law gives strength to sin. You wouldn't think that you would find that in the New Testament, but he actually advocates that when you forbid something, it actually increases the desire for the very thing that you're forbidding.
Totally.
Yeah, that's New Testament. Not often talked about in churches, but it's right there.
Not often talked about by our
true.
lawgivers and authorities, right?
No.
It's very true.
Well, I mean, think about it, and I know we need to go, but like, think about that. The more laws you have, the more you can compromise a person or blackmail a person. It's just like these IRS codes. If someone wants to run for political office, well, you can find something. You can find where they've broken the law somewhere, compromise them, and get them to do whatever you want them to do. You know, so the more laws you have, actually increases lawlessness, because nobody's not guilty of some kind of violation when you make laws so easy to, I mean, when you break the law just by accident. So it's a real problem that we have too many laws on the books, and it's actually increasing our lawlessness. More laws are not the answer.
You are preaching to the choir, my friend. I'm a lifelong libertarian. I fundamentally believe in limited government as a metaphysics principle. We need more morals and less laws.
The other thought I had was that you were just talking about with all the proliferation of all these synthetics.
Yeah. I
wonder if this doesn't play into the depopulation agenda that they've allowed. It's crazy. We don't talk about this often, but there was very powerful people in papers written that we were overpopulating the earth. And so you wonder if a lot of these things are allowed to just go, because, I mean, we're just there's
a well-established, attitude among elites that, population is out of control. And eugenics was a big thing in the early part of the 20th century. And there's certainly an element of like allowing the underclasses to just, wither up and die if they would allow them to. The problem is the underclasses don't just wither up and die. They actually breed like mad. And if you actually want to reduce population, we need to raise prosperity. That's the irony, is like the poorer people get, the more they have babies. It's like a totally biological response. So the poorest populations, the most distressed populations, the Gaza Strip for a long time had the highest birth rates in the world. It was the opposite of prosperity. And so,
with COVID.
And COVID, there's plenty of folks who
go on and on,
killing 1 billion people. And so, like funding them full of drugs and letting them wither up and die. Like, sure, there's no question there's people that advocate for that behind the scenes or even openly.
Yeah.
On that note,
everybody. All right.
That's why we're gonna break the goddess, because she's all pro-life, and we're all very pro-life around here. We like life. Life is for living.
Well, good living.
Life is God. Yeah.
Life is a goddess. All right. Well, thank you guys. Thanks, Joshua, for showing up late. Appreciate it. We're not going to have it next week. I'm going to be busy next week. But 2 weeks from now, we'll do trans. We'll do a special topic on trans folks.
All right.
So that'll be a fun one. So thank you, everybody. Everyone who was listening, edwarddodge.substack.com. And thanks, Josh. Thanks, Lisa. And until next time.
You guys. Bye. See you in the chat.
Take care.
Bye.